Was that a good look for the former president to have boxes in a bathroom?
I don't know. Is it a good picture to have boxes in a garage that opens up all the time? A bathroom door locks.
Welcome everybody. David here, waiting for Matt Leck to find the ones and twos. Brother, how are you doing?
Unleash David Griscom.
Yes, please. Welcome everybody. Left Reckoning 122, man. We're getting up there. Stoked to be doing this today on a big day for all of our friends over at MSNBC. Yes, Trump was brought before justice. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. But just want to let folks know we're going to be joined in just a couple minutes by Nick French, who has a couple excellent pieces in Jacobin, particularly one, Marxism doesn't equal wokeness, but if you oppose oppression, you should be a Marxist. Really looking forward to talking with him. And then Matt and I have, I don't know, a pretty damning video of one RFK who was supposed to be the chosen one, was supposed to be the one to take down the military establishment, and has almost immediately rolled over from the pro-apartheid lobby in pretty impressive.
It is weird how sticky that issue is, and even Cornel West should be better, I think, than Look, we've talked about the good things about Marianne and embracing the economic message domestically, but not super big fan of some of the Israel messaging with regards to her as well. Cornel West also has some odd things, and I think his statement his feelings, hopefully he can elaborate them, and they're more nuanced than some tweets that have been dug up, but it's an issue that is very tough for people to have a good position on. Even Bernie Bernie, I think, has stood up well when Ilhan and folks and Rashida Tlaib are slandered by the Democratic Party as anti-Semites. But even his positions, this is a difficult thing for people. And we see this with candidates too. This is a difficult issue.
Yeah, no, totally. We'll be talking about that in a little bit, and reminding folks this Thursday we're going to be doing a special stream on Cuba with former guest Amina Sheikh, who was part of a labor delegation to the country. So really make sure that you check that out Thursday at 3 Central. But look, we got to talk about it. It's sort of the law of podcasts. I know podcasts like The Daily are probably rolling in big numbers talking about the Trump case here. And Matt, could you tell people what's been going on?
So Trump was arraigned on federal charges this afternoon, pled not guilty, 37 charges related to handling of classified documents. That brings his total indictment count, somebody pointed out, to 71, which is, Barry Bonds type numbers. But let's watch this news clip here. We'll fill in some of the stories. And I just love what's interesting about this is I think there is, and we'll mention Bronco March's speech and piece in Jacobin, which I think kind of lays the correct significance on different parts of these stories, and then what exactly the hypocrisy looks like. I think Biden mishandling as to Kevin McCarthy's, what about? Okay, Trump has documents next to a toilet. Well, Biden has documents next to a Corvette. One, we shouldn't have an overclassification system, but two, that stuff should be public records. That stuff should be public property. The Nixon tapes where Nixon wanted to be like, hey, that's mine. And we're like, no, actually that's ours. And that is how it should be. And so when Hillary Clinton was doing stuff, it's fucking revolting to see Hillary and the podcast Johns talking about, ooh, what is your feeling about him getting tripped up for something that, we all had to act. Was there anybody more thankful than a liberal when Bernie Sanders said they don't care about your damn emails?
Oh yeah, it was such a
right. And it's it's gross, but also we do have an overclassification problem, and it does get selectively weaponized with regards to politics here. That's definitely true. On the other hand, I do want to point out Reality Winner's whole position on this, which is she herself was quoted as saying it was egregious.
Do you remind people of who that is, just because people?
Yeah, Reality Winner leaked documents purported to, I believe, election machinery, and ended up, she's been incarcerated since 2017, 4 years for that. She you got the full force of this. And she's one of many people who, I mean, Bronco's piece goes through when you're not a president or presidential candidate and you mishandle documents, I don't care about any story. I don't care about, you decided to do something out of convenience. You broke the law, you're going to jail.
Mhm.
And that is this is a complex thing to emphasize, I find.
No, totally. Well, let's get to that nuance in a second and just remind people of what's going on because it's pretty good.
Yeah, and we got some good images here.
What we can expect.
An unprecedented arraignment expected to unfold in Miami federal court Tuesday. Former President Trump to be arrested and arraigned on 37 counts, alleging he willfully retained highly sensitive documents on the U.S. nuclear program, military, and U.S. vulnerabilities to attack. Trump calling on his supporters to protest. Security preps underway outside the courthouse. The city's mayor saying this.
We wanted to ensure the public that we are ready.
On the campaign trail, Trump, still the GOP presidential frontrunner, denying any wrongdoing, accusing President Biden of weaponizing the Justice Department.
We did absolutely nothing wrong.
The 49-page indictment says after leaving the White House in 2021, Trump carelessly stored classified documents containing national defense secrets throughout his Mar-a-Lago resort, in boxes in a ballroom, even a bathroom. Prosecutors say Trump did return some of the boxes last.
Sorry. We'll go back to that bathroom clip.
Is in a ballroom, even a bathroom.
Okay, so
That's
no,
sorry. If ever there's a red-brown alliance, like that looks like a good communist in Brooklyn's bathroom, right? Just like
man, it's a beautiful image. It's one that if you told me it was AI, I would believe. I'd be like, damn, we need to invest a lot more of a capital into this technology because it's great stuff. And I want to address one thing. There's the thing coming out about the plan of attack with regards to Iran that Trump supposedly purloined, and I am glad to know about that. But I don't think you can just thank Trump for that. I think you can thank the investigation. You can both thank Trump for purloining it and the investigation of Trump for purloining it into it, right? It's not like he was going somewhere. He was holding on to these things. And it's hard to know, like, the kleptocratic nature of, like, why powerful people want to retain this stuff. Is it for, like, specific, like, oh, this is going to be worth that to this person? Or is it, a general cache of shit that I get to control and other people don't control? I don't really know what it is, but I think this is pretty clear cut. And I would say, like, the only time the bathroom door is locked is if there's someone in there taking a shit.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that it's important actually not to miss, what these documents are. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about, for example, like America's nuclear arsenal, allegedly as well, like these battle plans for, an invasion of Iran, which is something that, I think people should take very seriously. Of course, like, the government always comes up with, certain kinds of strategies for all kinds of scenarios, right? But just knowing how reckless both Trump and the Biden administration have been in regards, with Iran. I agree with Bronco again, another piece that he wrote on the subject, saying like that should be a bigger part of the story, as well as just how high up and how dangerous and how, because these things, like, you can fall into a war pretty quickly, particularly with the United States government's like willingness, for example, to play along with Israel, which has shown itself not only to be hawkish, but by some accounts, like potentially trying to egg on an armed conflict with Iran, which would be devastating for millions and millions of people, right? So that all that stuff is like 100% serious, and people should take it as such. But this is also extremely fucking funny. It's just reminding people, like, basically what he's in trouble for here is that he took a bunch of, classified documents, had them strewn across the winter White House, which he was calling Mar-a-Lago, in the bathroom, on stages, in a very high traffic area. The Iran story, he just pulls out one of these documents to somebody who was interviewing him, where he also admits that he's like, yeah, I probably should have declassified this to myself, which is like the thing that's really amazing about this case. And we'll talk a little bit more seriously in a second about the general stuff. But the thing that is amazing about this case is just how incredibly incriminating Donald Trump can be to himself because
The constant undercutting of basically people's defenses of him, like oh yeah, he was president. Of course he could declassify. It's like, yeah, when I was president, I could have declassified this. Now I can't.
And just while we're looking at fun stuff, I think this picture is one of the most beautiful things that I've seen of Donald Trump's presidency. The just an incredible shot, and I think really encapsulates him as a man and as a political figure. But yeah, I mean, like, we'll see what ends up happening with this. There's a lot to talk about comparing this, for example, to the other case against him in New York. This judge has ruled in his favor before in Florida. Florida is a state that is a little bit more predispositioned to maybe being more pro-Trump. It only takes one person to create a hung jury against him. So we'll see how this ends up playing out. But look, the level of willingness, the willingness of Trump to sort of refuse to play ball with the government, the recklessness of the way that he was handling very important government documents, it is something that is like worth making, it is something that is a scandal.
And also, I'll just say, like, there is one differentiating thing. Like, he gave, federal authorities the runaround with regards to, like, hey, return this stuff, more so than, I mean, I don't want to speak for Hillary because I'm not up to date on that, and I frankly believe malfeasance from them. But like that, there's like if you actually read into like the type of bullshit, like, you can't get away with that. Like, nobody, like, I don't know that Biden could get away with what Trump was doing. Like, yeah, like, go fuck yourself. Oh, we gave you back this. It's like, hey, there's a lot more. Oh, is there? I don't know, but I thought we just want. It's like I don't know. It's very clearly shoddy.
So here are the two kind of more serious points, right? The first one is political. Right, regardless of how reasonable this case is, regardless of how seriously Trump incriminated himself, the fact of the matter is that this is like one of many of these kind of attempts to defeat Trump, defeat the kind of movement that he's created through the legal system. Right, there has been a worrying tendency, I think, amongst liberals in particular, to want to sort of sit outside of politics, hoping that eventually a referee will come in and sort of shoo away the right wing instead of defeating them politically, defeating them by supporting things like Medicare for all, a more robust social safety net, economic populist policies. Right, there's this kind of hope that if through some kind of a machination, this is going to go away. I'm gonna tell you right now, it won't. Even if he goes to jail from this, that movement will not go away. And there's been this kind of deep fantasy that has had very dangerous consequences. Most notably has been this willingness of people on that kind of MSNBC liberal left to embrace censorship, to be worked up about disinformation, which has been used extremely well by the powerful to try to protect legitimate criticisms of American empire. And it's something that people should not be comfortable with. It's a very morbid symptom from our failing political culture. The second point is the one that you were bringing up earlier, Matt, is that when it comes down to something like this, you either need to treat the lack of care for privileged documents as a non-issue in the way that it regularly is treated for political figures. Across the board treated in that way. Instead, what we actually get, as you were saying earlier, is that a lot of like low level officials have the book thrown at them, regardless of if something bad happened, regardless if it was done with intent, regardless if it was like a reasonable threat to national security. Right, there are different rules at play for the wealthy and the powerful in this country than there are for the rest of us, and you can see that in the many different examples of people who have been punished for these kind of low level offenses. So like, yeah, the right wing is going to make a big deal about Biden and his documents. They're going to make a big deal about Hillary Clinton and her mishandling of her email servers, right? And they're going to have a point until we either sort of hold everybody to this kind of standard, or we stop basically trying to use these things to threaten folks. And more often than not, right, the really punishing aspect about this is how particularly like the Espionage Act is used to silence and attack whistleblowers.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like we have to do both things, because it's like I don't want to see. I simultaneously want to make sure that it's known that that stuff is public property.
Totally.
At the same time, it is like the big problem of overclassification and things that should be public. And I don't think, I mean, I think, was it Ryan Grimm who floated like, if Trump serves prison, Biden should, pardon him after a week or so like that. Like, I don't know what the actual way to strike this balance is practically, or even like idealistically. But I do know that I'm glad that we know, that the WikiLeaks cables that showed that we were pressuring Haiti to not do a minimum wage because Levi's margins would get affected. Like, that stuff, that's not what we're talking about with this Trump shit, or even with Hillary or Biden. Like, that's a problem because they're trying to basically protect stuff from the eyes of historians. At least is my, or journalists immediately is my impression. And like, I'm not sure what the best way to do that, but it's a tension.
Well, we're going to have a lot of opportunity to watch this over the next few months. I'm sure this is going to continue to be a major story. I think it's time to bring on our guest for this evening, Nick French. Nick French is an assistant editor at Jacobin Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us today on Left Reckoning.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Really stoked to be chatting with you. We're going to be talking about two pieces. One I talked about earlier, Marxism Doesn't Equal Wokeness, and another piece called Don't Fall for the Myth of the Job Creator. But just to bring you into our world, Nick, we have to share this incredible video from none other than Charlie Kirk, somebody who shows up a few times in your piece, talking about a very deranged and kind of paranoid life that you have to live if you are on the right wing in America today.
We are now having to, I'm guilty of this. I'm going through my kitchen, I'm going through my refrigerator, and I'm starting to ask the question, well, is this ketchup bottle woke? Is this mustard? I mean, literally, we're at the place now where we have to go through, is the company that makes this? And so, blackoutcoffee.com/Charlie, I'm sure many of you are coffee drinkers because you're high end.
Wow.
I think it's been a really beautiful gift from the right wing recently to give the left Chick-fil-A, Bud Light, and Cracker Barrel, and I just say keep them coming. But this kind of deranged, right wing freak out about companies and wokeness. It's funny. It's pretty. There's an aspect of it that Matt and I have been trying to make the point. It's like, it seems sort of new, but they've always been doing this kind of thing. Before it was woke, it was political correctness and getting worked up about that, right? But one thing that I think interests us a lot on this show has been like how they've been trying to attach that to Marxism. And we have this from Charlie as well, which you cited in your piece, which is about this kind of secret Marxism that's behind wokeness. And he has a woke rating that's been created here. But here he calls CRT Marxism in schools, DEI Marxism in hiring, ESG Marxism in finance, LGBT Marxism in identity, BLM Marxism and in race. And the new one, CEI Corporate Equity Index, Soros-funded Marxism and corporate governance. Nick,
Soros-funded Marxism as opposed to just Marxism. That's
Nick, are we winning right now? Is Marxism in power in the United States of America?
Yeah, I wish we could say that. But yeah, no, it is funny in a way, but like you said, David, it has a long history. Political correctness is kind of one version of it, especially if we're looking at the idea that there's a kind of like authoritarianism on the left, such that, if you step out of line, if you say the wrong things, you're going to be canceled. What did they say before canceled? What happened if you were?
They might have just had to use normal English, be fired, right?
Yeah, you're going to be fired. People will be not nice. People don't want to be your friend anymore. But I mean, as I discussed in the piece, it really goes back to this theory of, cultural Marxism, which itself is kind of a reinvention of the like Nazi line about Jews and how, the Jewish people were simultaneously like global capitalists, but also behind Bolshevism and global communism. This kind of conspiratorial thing that links a bunch of things that are seemingly unrelated, but really there's a few insidious Jewish intellectuals behind it all. So the cultural Marxist theory in particular that became popular after World War II said that basically Jewish intellectuals who immigrated to the States, including especially the Frankfurt School, thinkers like Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse, were really the source of everything that ailed America from the right-wing point of view, right? Like, not only were they advocating for Marxism, but in fact, movements for civil rights, for, the feminist movement, for gay rights, all of these were kind of Marxism in a transmogrified form that, left-wing professors had indoctrinated the youth to promote. So that's a really old version of this.
Yeah, without Horkheimer, we wouldn't have had the civil rights movement, and Jim Crow would still be around, I guess.
Right.
And it's like it's interesting, like in the way that they talk about it, I think is different from like maybe like a more accurate reading of like the New Left, for example. But like, and I won't put you on the spot to like condemn the Frankfurt School unless you want to, which you're very welcome to. But like a lot of Marxists, for example, see that cultural turn to be a huge decline in like Marxism as like as a political philosophy, in the sense of it having like political weight, right? This retreat to the university, right? This over focus on culture versus maybe a more traditional Marxism, which was more focused on like class in general. That it's always funny to me when you hear like James Lindsay's or Charlie Kirk. I think James Lindsay might at least be able to do this a little bit more intelligently than Charlie Kirk. Make this argument that like basically it's this kind of secret that they've uncovered, right? This like secret hidden plot from society, right? Which is why your alarm bell should start ringing when you also hear it attached to Soros, right? Again, like Soros is no Marxist. This is a guy who made a lot of money, in finance, right? I'm curious, like, to hear your thoughts on like why they think that this is such an effective tool for them to basically be able to criticize maybe sort of more recent like social justice movements, we could call them.
Yeah. I think it's basically because of the legacy of the Cold War and the Red Scare. I think they're probably mistaken about how effective this is as a rhetorical strategy, at least in today's day and age. But I think the idea is that if we associate everything we don't like, any kind of, liberal or progressive causes, even relatively shallow ones like DEI or ESG, if we associate that with socialism or Marxism, those are much scarier, maybe more foreign seeming ideas. Again, they invoke this specter of authoritarianism. So yeah, they say they just want to like, hire more women or more racial minorities on corporate boards. But really, that's just the start of like setting up gulags, right? So I think that's the rhetorical tack, right?
And I think what's interesting about all of it is like on both sides, right? Because in a second we can maybe talk about some of the more Marxist or socialist criticisms of like these new corporate initiatives, right? But I think across the board, what's interesting about this is like there's a side of this that is like elite politics. And what I mean by that is it's just like, how do corporate boardrooms look, or even how do universities look, right? From like the left progressive side, maybe, supporting those kind of endeavors, but also from the Republican side, because they're like, they don't want, their kids who go to the nice universities and these schools to be exposed to this kind of stuff, or they don't want their boards to reflect these kind of values, right? Like, this is like a battle between well-to-do groups in America.
Sorry, just to add on to that, I remember watching Dave Rubin, and it sunk into me like, oh, we're talking to different audiences. He's talking to actually like, he can be that stupid because he's performing for like board members who are like anti-woke or whatever, right? And so he'll say like, oh yeah, if they say we need like this much representation on TV, they're going to say it about your boardroom too. And it's like, that's never something I've ever been concerned about, man. Like,
yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's insightful. I mean, I think, the vast majority of Americans, like working class people, poor people, most middle class people for that matter, yeah, why should they give a fuck who is on the the board, of Disney or whatever? And then it's like, yeah, people up in arms about, affirmative action, or like, what is AP school history curriculum. I saw a good, I think maybe it was Sam Adler Bell who made a point about Ron DeSantis's message really being pitched in the you guys described. It's focused on the like neuroses of the right wing elite and privileged professionals, right? And it's not necessarily something that has a resonance with less wealthy people or working class people. I mean, did you guys see the clip recently where Donald Trump was sort of, even like mocking the kind of obsession with wokeness? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, where he said that. I mean, I think him versus DeSantis is going to draw these dynamics out in a very interesting way, because he's like, wokeness is something everyone says, but I don't like it because nobody knows what it means. And I also think he probably saw when that one woman was Bethany Mandel was on Brianna Joy Gray's show and couldn't define it. And it's like, oh, this is a bad look for our side.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I'll just say, for the right, which give them some credit, like they can sometimes be good at branding. Like Death Tax was great.
Right.
Death Tax worked very well because it sounded so awful. I can't remember what the one was, Obamacare, something similar to death, right? Death panels, right? I guess that's a theme. But I'm sorry, it's like way too many acronyms. Like, I follow this stuff sort of for a living, or the discourse generally, and like I always have to remind myself what ESG is, CEI and things like that. I do wonder how like effective it will be. And as we were sort of joking around about before the show, like, at a certain point, if like the pitch for the right wing is like, don't watch baseball or football anymore, and you have to buy special coffee from our non-woke friends, I don't know how much of a popular movement that could be. But look, these are conversations like that have been happening. I think there's no doubt about it that like there's been a cultural reckoning over the past decade, and I think a lot of people either embrace it or there's been some resistance to it. I mean, like, I was wondering, Nick, if you wanted to talk a little bit about like separating these kind of movements from like Marxism or socialism as a philosophy, because I do think that like I don't know, it could be sometimes a difficult line to draw.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that, Marxists are opposed to oppression and support, racial equality, gender equality, sexual freedom, all of that. I think that what Marxists object.
Oh, you might have clipped out there.
Yeah, let's see here.
To is the way that
Nick, so we lost you for a second. You were just saying what Marxists object to.
Sorry, yeah. What they object to is the way that liberals try to advance these causes and also often weaponize them against the left and they use them in ways that are more about claiming the moral high ground than actually helping people, especially less privileged people. So oftentimes, if Ron DeSantis's anti-woke politics is an elite politics, well, what he's responding to is an elite politics, right? It's about diversifying the incoming college classes at the most elite institutions of higher education. It's about diversifying, corporate boardrooms, right? Like the sort of highest, seats of power in the United States and in the world. It's making sure people use the right language in a very sort of clinical way, and oftentimes it's used to distract from, or to, as Hillary did in 2016 against Bernie, to put down leftist proposals for redistribution or universal social programs that would help everyone, and especially help, women, racial minorities, the people who are disproportionately harmed by economic disadvantage and being workers in a capitalist society.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie was attacked ahead of both Iowa primaries in 2016 and 2020 as being somehow sexist or sus on these issues, when in fact his material program would have been, the most beneficial for any of these metrics by far.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in its most insidious forms, I think it kind of reifies existing inequalities and hierarchies. I saw someone in the chat mention Robin DiAngelo, right? Which is sort of almost a caricature of this stuff, except that she's a real person who actually, does this for a living, where it's really about, if you're white, you should turn inward and focus on, all of the bad thoughts in your head, and really distracting people from actually changing the world. There are people who are advocating kind of like race essentialism, where it's like, people of certain races are naturally less rational or less logical. It's like really toxic stuff that's just, white supremacy in another.
Yeah, sorry. I think you clipped out again. Sorry, brother.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Yeah, I think that like this gets to like one of the like an important bit too, where like I think that like there should be some level of like recognizing from the left, from like the socialist left, of like recognizing one, like the severe need for a lot of reckonings in this country, be they like racial or in gender or in sexuality, right? And it's like recognizing that like people are certainly oppressed, but also being able to challenge this kind of liberal view of it, which like individualizes a lot of the problems and oftentimes like leaves out power out of these things, right? I mean, this is the point with Robin DiAngelo, for example, is that like, instead of like recognizing, for example, like the reason, that like, certain groups in this country have been exploited, at high levels by capitalism. Instead, it is like something inherent in you as an individual. And even, particularly in the way that her like seminars are done, right? It's like you, the employee, right? Somebody who is like limited power in your corporate structure, is like, you're the reason that this is the way, instead of like the entire profit motive or the entire system, that creates these problems.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, just to kind of give a very quick gloss on the way that I think Marxists think about it, or should think about it, is like, we want to build a movement to redistribute wealth and power from the capitalist class and the most privileged professionals to the working class. Ultimately, we want to go beyond that, democratize the economy, society more broadly. Now, in doing that, well, first of all, we think that that's going to disproportionately benefit, racial minorities, women who have been most harmed by the capitalist system, who have historically been excluded from better jobs, or have been forced to take worse jobs, or they've suffered the disproportionately the violence of the state, the police state, the prison system. So we think that's going to benefit everyone, and much more so than DEI or ESG, any of the alphabet soup woke things.
I'm really holding out for ESG. I think it's gonna that and AI. I think we're really gonna turn things around for us.
Right. But just to continue on that, we also think that it is important to challenge, individual prejudice, bigotry, discrimination, but we do it because we think that's necessary to building this broader coalition that can benefit everyone. And we think that things like racism, things like racialized police violence, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, they weaken us as a class, and they make it easier for capitalists to pit us against each other. They make it easier for them to exploit, desperate workers who are afraid of getting deported, or who are afraid of becoming homeless and becoming the victims of the police state, and so on. So, if we're charitable to the liberal wokes, we shared a lot of their goals, assuming they're sincere about that, but we have a totally different vision of how to achieve them and how that fits into a project of social transformation.
I'm curious what you think about this, but just bringing up like a historical example that maybe might like help make this point for folks. I've been reading a lot about the Southern tenant farmers union in the South, right? And this is at a time, when we lived, incredibly segregated society. Like the height, right? We're talking about the Jim Crow South here. Also like high levels of exploitation for workers. Being sent out and being in poverty, was a death sentence, for many people. And it was something that was always present. You also had a state that was advocating against working people, right? So like if you came across your boss, the state would oftentimes join your boss and either throw you in prison, or in other times like sheriffs would just straight up murder people. And what ends up happening here, these workers who were all in the same situation, both white and black, realized that by coming together and creating this very strong union, they could get more concessions than if they sort of bargained separately. Because, for example, if the white members created a white only union, well, then like there's a lot of black people in the South, and those wages and contracts can be undercut by using that kind of labor, and vice versa, right? Both ways. And what ends up happening with this union is like really incredible. They win tremendous victories. And what do they end up doing with a lot of money? You have some of these cooperative farms that are set up that are desegregated in the South before the civil rights movement, right? Something that was actually showing practically what a different future could look like. And that came from people joining together and fighting for, economic democracy and economic freedom. And, social justice and like equality and fighting against racism were central tenets, and we're critical to this institution. But for it to be extremely effective, it was attached also to the system that oftentimes creates those kind of bigotries, or creates the logic for the state and the powerful to try to enforce, for example, like racial hierarchies in the South, right? And like you see this like practically in American struggle all the time. And like now, for some reason in 2020, making those kind of arguments, like stuck in the past 2023, making that argument can seem controversial, right? And I think a big part of it has been that there has been this kind of move to try to take away from that history, and instead replace it with something that is more corporate friendly, that is less threatening to the very powerful, because they're very happy to pay a consultant a bunch of money to hand out spreadsheets to people about like their inherent issues, versus like actually restructuring the way that their companies work and the relationship with people and workers in the general public.
Yeah, very well said. That's a great example of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. But really, there's a whole history. Basically the history of the civil rights movement and its historic connection to labor and to the socialist and communist left in this country, it's been kind of erased, and I think people are now starting to recover it, sort of post Occupy, post BLM, post Bernie. More people are learning about and talking about those historical connections. But yeah, I mean, the major leaders of the civil rights movement, Baird Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, they came out of the labor movement. They came out of the socialist left, right? And the Communist Party, socialists, after a certain point at least, mostly saw the project of equal rights for Black Americans as bound up with a greater project of class struggle, redistribution, expanding democracy throughout society and the economy. And yeah, people don't talk about that. I mean, it's almost being in Jacobin world, it almost feels a bit rote to make all these points these days. But people forget that MLK, that I Have a Dream speech, that was given at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, which was promoting a broad vision of social democracy that would benefit everyone, along with obviously breaking down legal discrimination, Jim Crow, etc. So I think it's really important that we, on the left, recover that history and sort of pound it into people's heads that, hey, the Robin DiAngelo way of doing anti-racism, the DEI way, that's not the only way.
But if you care about these things, this is the way to actually, tackle them. Well, I mean, since we're talking about jobs, we also want to talk to you about another piece that you had in Jacobin, which is don't fall for the myth of the job creator. And this is something that is, brought up all the time. The right loves to make this point. It's always very fun when they do. Bernie Sanders obviously is always attacked for not being a job creator. But there's this idea that you shouldn't hate the wealthy or come at them because they provide these things for us, which are called jobs, which are the things that allow us to eat and have a roof over our head. So maybe we should be more thankful for these people who've been giving us this really, really wonderful program. I mean, is that a fair way to think about the way American society is set up?
Yeah. I mean, it's not, although there's a kind of deceptive appeal to it, I would say, right? Because, it is, for the most part, at least what we see is it's individuals or a group of individuals providing capital to start a business. Once they start a business, that business starts hiring people. So you think, oh, what created the jobs are the people who started the business. Of course, it's often more complicated than that because many businesses get all sorts of government subsidies, tax breaks, things like that. They of course benefit from public infrastructure, but there is that kind of, I think, surface level thing. It's these capitalists, these heroic entrepreneurs. They're the ones starting up these firms, and so we should thank them for creating the jobs. But yeah, the argument of the piece is basically just well, no, what creates jobs is employing society's productive resources.
Right.
So the state can start a business, and it does start businesses. There are state-owned enterprises all over the world, even in the U.S. And then once you do that, you have to hire people. So you've created jobs. Workers can get together and pool their funds and create a cooperative. So really, the question is, why is it that people who are lucky to be born rich or who are able to hoodwink venture capitalists into giving them money, like the Theranos woman, what was her name? Elizabeth Holmes.
Yep.
Yeah. Why is it that they get to decide how society's resources are used? And why is it that they get to extract all of the benefit from their workers' labor?
And I think, sorry, Matt, just really fast. I think that's a really important point to make. Like in your piece, you're responding, I mean, to this argument in general, but like Howard Schultz during his meltdown at his congressional hearing. And like, let's not forget, for example, I mean, let's not forget why he's making this argument in the first place, because he's pissed that his workers are wanting to do something that he doesn't want them to do, which is create a union, right? And then he brings up the job creator. So it's not like a benevolent thing. It's like saying I also own these people effectively, right? I should be able to demand against them, whatever I want because I created this job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really important because it gets at something that I think is often overlooked. So one kind of response to what I say in the article that I bring up is you could say, well, sure, some people just got lucky, or some people are evil and got their startup capital through evil means. But there are some people who scrimp and save, and through hard work, they save up enough to start a small business, and then they turn that into a successful empire. So what about those people? Aren't those people like virtuous job creators who we should be grateful for? And what I say is, well, look, I mean, putting aside the question of whether it was fair for them to accumulate that capital in the first place, I still think it probably wasn't. But putting aside that question, why does the fact that they did that then enable them to become tyrants like Howard Schultz, who get to decide on a whim how their employees' lives are going to go, and who are saying, no, you don't get to have a union. You don't get to have even a basic say over your working conditions or basic protections if we want to fire you or discipline you. So I think that's really important. Like, yeah, this job creator rhetoric doesn't justify these private tyrannies.
It masks like the reality, which is that that class of people is job suppressors, and this is sort of like a civilizational question, like who gets to authorize work to be done. And it reminds me of this New Deal liberal journalist, New Deal era work by Frederick Lewis Allen called The Lords of Creation. And I just think that's a really great book because he's writing this post New Deal. And it's a wild because he's like, good thing we put that free market stuff behind us, and basically making fun of capitalists who said, despite the economy going to shit, we're the only ones who can do this. And actually, no, they're sitting on a lot of productive capacity and not allowing it to thrive. And like, I mean, we're going back. We talked to, we're talking 18th Brumaire and Communist Manifesto, and like one of the big demands then was like the workshops, the national workshops. Like this is really fundamental question for civilizations.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the classic Marxist critiques of capitalism is that it doesn't actually employ society's resources in the optimally productive and rational way. So, you have all these factories sitting idle, all these people are unemployed who could be doing good work. And, the New Deal in this country is, I guess, the closest we came to something like, actual full employment program.
Which they don't like, by the way.
Yeah. Right. We haven't played the clip, but the Furman, the guy who was Obama advisor, saying, just casually on CNBC saying, hey, maybe we have the Fed crank this up so we can get 2 more points unemployment, get this inflation under control. Just casually talking about that over breakfast. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because their profitability depends on people being out of work and desperate enough to accept low wages.
Yeah, because if we're building, whatever, like a grid, that's competition for labor for them.
Right. Yeah. So they're also, I mean, they're not just refusing to employ as many people as they could because it's not profitable, but they're actually engaged in political conflict against the left, against people in the state who would want to, put more people to work, build public projects, public works, do that kind of thing. So yeah, at many levels, you're right, Matt. They're job suppressors rather than job creators.
And like it has like serious consequences. Like you look at the IRA or IRA as they're calling it, and effectively, which is supposedly, our plan to start dealing with climate change. And effectively it's like tax credits and subsidies and, a little help around the edges for private capitalists to do certain kinds of investment to, invest in certain kinds of production. And it's a very inefficient way of doing that. And in the case of like climate change, an extremely dangerous one, to leave in the hands of private capital, because they don't have like the public interest at heart. They are most interested in making as much money as possible. And like, yeah, it's nice if you can maybe spur them a little bit every once in a while to align with the public good. But when it's expensive and it's inefficient versus just building out, renewable power, building out nuclear power across the country, in the TVA style, which, again, like the capitalists certainly oppose. But there's this timidness even from, the Democratic Party now to do any kind of, direct investment or direct, creating companies, building things on their own.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think this is one of the major questions for the left today. What do we think about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and this kind of timid shift towards more public intervention in the economy via targeted subsidies, tax credits to, green capitalists, essentially. And yeah, I mean, I think that timidity comes directly from an unwillingness or inability to really take on capital, and also the lack of a coalition, a political coalition that's going to, promote this program, promote the kind of program you were talking about, which is like a massive public build out of, public green power, nuclear power across the country. I think that's just the way in which like the contradictions of capitalism are manifesting politically right now. I've heard some socialists say, some on the left say that the Biden approach is all carrot, no stick. And I think that's dangerous for exactly the reasons you said, David. It's like, yeah, some of them might take the subsidies, but they're not going to build green energy at the scale we need. It's certainly not going to solve, the problem of unemployment in the way that we would hope, a Green New Deal might. So I think the left needs to be really clear-eyed about that. And yeah, again, we can't rely on capitalists. We can't rely on them to create the jobs. We can't rely on them to carry out this transition.
I don't know how deep we'll be able to go into it, but like this is one of those times where it's like the distinction between, for example, like a progressive and the socialist becomes massive, right? Because we're not just talking about fair wages. We want fair wages, right? We're not just talking about government programs like Medicare for all. We want that, but we're also talking about fundamentally like how we organize our society. And like I remember a few years back with Cale Brooks at Jacobin, I did a video about money and politics, right? And like the progressives, like we talk a lot about money and politics in the way that like campaigns are funded, and of course it's like legalized corruption. It's a huge problem, but what's the bigger problem with money and politics is that we have a bunch of like private tyrants sitting outside of politics, sitting outside of like public influence, who hoard tremendous amounts of our like resources, right, of social resources, and then we're just sort of begging them to do what we want. Right. And like, again, like in the climate change one, it becomes really pressing, but it's like anything. Remember when we were running out of baby formula, or all of these, things like that. I think there's like a shortage in cancer medicine right now because of the profit motive, right? Like this is a dangerous thing to have private individuals basically being able to make decisions for the whole vast majority of us, and it's completely outside of the political conversation. It is treated like there is a firm wall between that wealth and that influence that they hold over society, and like what we're talking about,
Totally. Yeah, and I think it's because once you start thinking about that and talking about that, it's not just that capitalists like fund their favorite candidates, the people are going to vote the way that they want, but that they have structural leverage over the economy and over the state because they hoard all of our resources. Then you have to think, well, the way to address that would be to take away their control of their resources, democratize the economy, democratize finance, figure out some way of publicly deciding how these resources should be used. And once you're talking that way, you're in the realm of being a socialist, and that's just, on the margins. Even our our democratic socialist tribunes in Congress, we love them. People like Bernie are the reason that, I'm here. At least a lot of us are here having this conversation right now. But, it's rare to have that conversation about public ownership. But I still think that that's the way we need to go if we're going to have a solution to the climate crisis, if we're going to have a real sustainable solution to inequality, mass unemployment, mass precarity, and so on.
And that's what you mean by sticks. Like, we can't just do carrots like tax incentives and
Right.
subsidies to chip manufacturers. Oh, sorry, my computer just froze. There needs to be actual threat and a challenge to the authority of our capitalists.
Right. And like fossil fuel companies, you're not going to incentivize all of them to stop taking oil and gas out of the ground, right?
No.
It's certainly not at the speed that we need to. That's a case where the government just needs to come in and say, hey, you're done. You're replaced.
No, absolutely. Well, Nick, really was a lot of fun talking with you. People should definitely follow Nick on Twitter and read Nick's work in Jacobin Magazine. There's links below to do that. Really appreciate your time, brother.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. I had fun.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
See ya.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that try not to be antagonizing to our good progressive brothers and sisters, but I do think that making these lines of demarcation clear, because these are things that are just so desperately needed. I think in our political conversations that is very much lacking right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, before we go to the post game, you can get access to that at patreon.com/leftreckoning, where Matt has a very titillating breakdown on the damage that the AI freaks are doing to gamers.
Investors, man. It's not even fucking AI freaks. They don't even exist. It's well, don't get me started.
Well, before we get there, we wanted to talk a little bit about RFK, and we haven't done too much on him. I think whenever we've talked about him, we've tried to talk about his stuff outside of the vaccine thing, because I think that at a certain point, that understanding, you're going to go in that conversation with whatever you think about that, right? And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's just sort of don't let some of these other things float under the radar, because what.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I'm also sensitive to the idea Gene, elaborated. I don't think it's while I'm skeptical and I will not hold my tongue on these candidates, I also don't think every opportunity to pull them up on something they slip up on is useful. However, there's certain things you can't entirely ignore.
No, I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm just saying that
Right.
almost any time anyone writes or talks about them, that's all they talk about. And I think that means that you're not getting the full spectrum, because there is this kind of argument that you've seen from people, on the left, maybe on the kind of outsides, maybe people who aren't necessarily a part of some of these big organizations, but people who care a lot about these things. We'll give them that, right? Who say yeah, I don't agree with him on this, but he's the only one who's willing to talk about this, and that. And the big one that people argue is that this is somebody who is unafraid to take on the American empire, right? And the best thing you can do as an American leftist or socialist right now is to take on the American war machine, right? I'm very sympathetic to the argument that something that is incredibly beneficial to the world, right? If you can weaken the power of the American war machine. But when we were talking about it a couple of weeks back, we were talking about it in the context of Roger Waters. Roger Waters was praised by RFK. And RFK shortly after deleted his tweet praising Roger Waters because he was informed of Roger Waters' position on Israel-Palestine. And watching him fold so quickly on that, for me, completely evaporates any kind of argument that this guy is going to have the backbone to take on, the military-industrial complex in general, for example. But If you don't believe me, or if you think that maybe we don't understand that particular chapter, here's an opportunity with a fairly friendly audience, right? Um, um, of RFK talking about Israel Palestine on Glenn Greenwald's show, and we can just let people make their own mind up about this.
Everything has a historical context in Israel. And if you look at why we don't have a two-state solution in Israel, which everybody now says they want, but both in 1947 and 1947, 1948, and then again in 2001, it was the Palestinian leadership that walked away from a two-state solution and pledged itself to the destruction of the Jewish people. Oh, and that.
So before we go any further, let's catch that last thing that he said again. He said, pledge themselves to the what was it, eradication? Let me get it. I'll play it again so people can get it exactly right.
Yeah.
People.
Lo siento.
Away from a two-state solution and pledged itself to the destruction of the Jewish people.
Destruction of the Jewish people. I mean, absolutely unhinged and wild thing to say about people who have seen in their lifetime, their homes, their lands be completely eradicated, being pushed.
They're so consumed with hate, though, to agree to a two-state solution.
But let's be very clear here. Saying that the Palestinians have dedicated themselves to the destruction of the Jewish people is such a heinous and absurd thing to say that it's hard to take anything else that he says seriously after that. But let's let him continue.
Clear history, and I think at a time when they had a very, very generous solution on the table. Now, the other thing I say is Israel is a democracy, but it's a flawed democracy, just like the United States. But if I was a dissident Arab Palestinian, would I rather be a dissident in Israel or in Saudi Arabia or Oman or Qatar or any other Arab nation? If you're a dissident, you get up in the middle of the public square and denounce the government. Where would you rather be? You'd rather be in Israel. It's the only place you're.
Yeah, an IDF guy can shoot you in the head and they can act like they can't get to the bottom of what happened.
Yeah, so we're talking about Shireen Abu Akleh, who is a Palestinian and American journalist who was killed, was shot by the IDF. And look, you don't even have to cherry pick. I mean, there are plenty of examples of people being brutalized by the Israeli state for speaking out against the occupation. Israel has, people who are, brought into Israeli courts in the occupied areas have a completely different judicial system set up for them. One that has an astronomical conviction rate. I think something like 99%. Because look, there's no justice there, and two, because people are held and detained for years often for very minor cases. So people will just plead guilty so that they can just serve out a sentence and then return, hopefully, to their homes and families that hopefully haven't been destroyed by another bombing done by Israel. So again, what the hell are you talking about here? Where would you rather be? We are seeing it happen before our eyes. What happens to people who are dissidents, right? And he's going to make this argument a second. Is the idea that people who support Palestine are somehow quiet about the Saudis? It's absolutely ludicrous, especially when more and more in the region, silent buddies have been the government of Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right? So this idea that these are two with disastrous consequences, right? So this idea that here's some kind of beautiful beacon of democracy surrounded by these dangerous countries, there's a lot of fucked up nations in the area, and Israel is one of them.
Yeah, compared to one ally, this has a civil society you might find more pleasant. It's not really a ringing endorsement. Yeah, Jesus.
And we need to have the same standard for judging Israel as we judge other Arab countries. We should, and Israel is going into the West Bank and killing children. Is never doing that deliberately. Never. And nobody has ever said it is.
Well, a lot of people have said it. A lot of people have said it is. But let me just ask you, because I just want to focus the.
Wait, and like we'll go forward, but credit to Glenn for not letting that one slide. I mean, that's sometimes I like interviewing can be tough sometimes, right? Because you want to figure out the right way to do it, particularly with like a candidate for office, right? Because you do just sort of want to let them say what they think, right? So I can maybe get the inclination to not say anything. But good on Glenn there for saying, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm not going to let that one slide."
Yeah, like the broader like context, like which of course, like if there weren't IDF soldiers taking pops at kids, which there are, like numerous occasions,
They're
high profile,
horrific videos of precision headshots.
Exactly, but also like I would say even more of like the generic. The Seattle Times paper show Israel counted calories to limit food in Gaza. Like, what effect does that have on kids?
Yeah. No, I mean it's just there's no way that you can run a prolonged bombing campaign or run a prolonged occupation and say like, well, it's never our intention for anything to ever happen to these children, right? I mean, this is straight up propaganda in the pure sense.
Apologetics, yeah.
Apologetics.
All of those other countries, it is the deliberate policy of those countries to attack and target civilians and to kill them. Israel is a model democracy in the Mideast. It's the only democracy in the Mideast. And as a democracy, it's a model for peacekeeping, there's never been a time in history when a democracy has gone to war with another democracy. So I think our policy in the United States should be to support the growth of democracies around the world.
I mean, so there you have it. I mean, just last little fact check there. I mean, talking about Israel being a model democracy. I mean, tell that to Israelis, right? Even dropping this issue as Israel continues to slide into far right authoritarianism, there have been massive protests and movements in civil society to challenge the extremely frightening degradation of democracy in that country for like Israeli citizens. Dropping for a second the apartheid system. I mean, look, at the end of the day, what you got there is pretty boiler. Like, you're not going to get a hostile interview on Israel Palestine to like a Joe Biden, for example, right? So because RFK is like sort of in this different kind of media ecosystem, he gets put on, gets questioned on these things. I think that's good, right? Well, this is like a pretty typical level apologetics for Israel that you would get from a lot of Democratic Party politicians, is what I'm saying.
And I have to point out, this is to the right of John fucking Kerry, who said on his leaving the State Department, if the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both, or it won't really ever be at peace. Just simple statement of fact.
Yeah. So look, the point here is that when it comes to RFK, these kind of ideas, these next level that like, oh, maybe we disagree with him on this or we disagree with him on that, but this is somebody who's willing to take the sledgehammer to the status quo. You're watching somebody trip over themselves over like one of the defining factors in American politics when it comes to foreign policy, and that is criticizing an apartheid regime that is Israel.
Yep.
Unable to even like the thing that's so amazing about this RFK clip though, Matt, is, as I was saying before, like this isn't even just like a little bit of apologetics mixed with, denial, of the more like milquetoast variety that you get from some maybe like progressive Democrats who are unwilling to really criticize
right
Israel, but like they'll put a little bit like, well, human rights should be respected, or this. I mean, this is straight up glowing. He's saying this is the only real democracy in the area. They have no intention of harming
Bush
people.
era.
The Palestinians have committed themselves to the destruction of Jewish people, right? I mean, this is like rabid APEC level stuff. And look, I'm sorry, you see somebody fall over this, you cannot believe that this person is capable or particularly interested in doing the real work. Like rhetorically, he might say some things about not wanting to prolong war in like Ukraine, Russia, but you see somebody fall over themselves in a moment like this. What makes you think that if they were to be elected president in the very, very unlikely scenario that they beat Joe Biden in the Democratic Party nomination, that they would? I mean, this is somebody telling you who they are very clearly, because RFK is already labeled as a kind of outsider, already labeled as somebody who's like dangerous for the Democratic Party, right? So like the upside for him to say things like this is very limited, right? Because he could just include the same people will be mad at him if he were to say some truth, for example, about Israel Palestine, as they are who are mad about him for what he said about Russia Ukraine, for example. So this is somebody telling you what he really thinks, and I think that it's very telling.
Yeah, I mean, and particularly on the Waters thing is so chicken shit. Like, I mean, look, if you want him to run for your ideas campaign, sure, fine, whatever. Like, this is bad. That's a bad intervention to say, hey, I'm going to stand up for this guy. Oh, wait, he said, what about Israel? Never mind. It's like, come on, man. Like, he's not serving the purposes you want him to serve, even.
Yeah. Well, it's dark, and look, I these are weird times. I know people are trying to look for a champion, and it's hard sometimes when you see, for example, presidential elections where
Did you see I've seen rumblings that Cornell may be ditching for the Green Party.
So I have two, and I would categorize them as rumblings. I haven't seen anything
Okay.
definitive, but possibly. I mean, I could have just missed it. But yeah, I have heard that
More
there's
on that maybe next week.
exploration, and if we get more information, I'd be more happy to talk about it. But look, I mean, like, beyond anything, I think that, like, if you are a socialist in 2023 and you're trying to figure out what to do, the things that you have to be doing is looking to class politics in this country and
Presidential
trying to build
election.
up some kind of institution versus, look, like socialists and like people who are like on the left, who maybe consider themselves to be outside the mainstream, love to make this point, like, I'm outside the mainstream, I'm not like a typical person. Then why are you doing the exact same thing as like almost every other American person, which is like hyper fixating on the horse race of a presidential election, right? Instead of like thinking structurally about how we build up this movement? It boggles my mind that people who consider themselves to be outside of tradition on these things are so adamant about trying to find some kind of sneaky way to say this represents my politics, when you have to just be able to recognize that as things are currently constituted, we don't have a socialist party that is putting up candidates for office, right? And in the socialist movement in this country is so just diffuse that, like, we don't have any level of coordination to be able to operate even in the ways of like the Socialist Party under Eugene Debs, right? And if that's what you want to see, for example, is seeing like a great radical figure like a Eugene Debs rise again and getting, 15% in a presidential election and being able to be proud about who you're voting for, you should think about how Eugene Debs was in that position in the first place versus just thinking that Eugene Debs created a socialist movement out of whole cloth by running for president. No, this was somebody who was dedicated themselves to the labor struggle and the social struggle for decades. And like, that's what's in front of us. And I know it's not the most fun thing in the world. I know that it would be better if all that we had in front of us was just creating the right argument and the right media strategy for a political candidate to take office. But that's just not how the world is. I'm sorry. It sucks. But like, we have to deal with the conditions that are in front of us. And the number one goal, it's not sexy. It's not sexy. It's hard work. But the only thing that we should be really thinking about doing is how can we build up institutions that can reflect and direct working class frustration and desire for a better world right now, and attaching to whatever presidential candidate comes along in whatever cycle is just not how we're going to be able to develop that. Sorry, it's just not how it's going to work, friends.
Yeah, well said.
Well, folks, we're going to jump over the post game. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We'll be taking calls and questions. If you have anything that you wanted to add, you can leave us a voicemail at 1940-289-7234. Again, that's patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Get access to that bonus, to the post game, and also our awesome bonus episode, which Matt had a great title for, Capitalism in the Countryside, where we looked at the political economy of rural America. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great talking with Keith, and yeah, look forward for more because he's on a beat that is very close to one David and I are fixated on.
I know it was really a lot of fun. So if you haven't seen it
Yeah.
too, and you're a patron, definitely check it out as well. We'll be over in the post game about 10-15 minutes, folks. So come and see us there. I'll be back this Thursday talking about Cuba, so 3 Central. So come by and join us for that. And everyone else, take care.
Peace.